So recording has started. Let's go ahead and get started, everybody. We'll start off with Prabhupada Pranam Mantra. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pacharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarane Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Let me go ahead and share my screen. You should all be able to see my screen now. So we'll go ahead and get started. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. So thank you very much, dear devotees, for joining the Gita overview today. And today we are going to review chapter number 13 and chapter number 14. We're going to do an overview of 13 and 14 today. Yesterday, we concluded chapter number 12, and that concluded the Bhakti Yoga section. Chapter 13 is called the nature, enjoyer, and the consciousness. Arjuna is going to start off with a bunch of questions. Let's get right into it. So just so that you have an understanding of the last 6 chapters of Bhagavad Gita, chapter 13 through 18 is generally known as the Jnana Yoga section, because there's going to be quite a bit of knowledge that is going to be given. First 6 chapters is called Karma Yoga, because that's where Krishna is basically explaining how do you act with knowledge, and that will eventually lead to bhakti. Now, second 6 chapters is relating to bhakti, because Krishna speaks about himself and he talks about the glories of devotional service. And then the last 6 chapters is how we'll describe how Gyan will lead to bhakti. So the first 6 chapters is where Karma Yoga is being described. There, when we say we do action, meaning that we do our work on the platform of knowledge, what knowledge are we referring to? The knowledge that I am a soul and Krishna is the super soul. The knowledge that I am a created and Krishna is the creator. I am small and infinite and Krishna is infinite. I'm sorry, I am small and finite and Krishna is infinite. So with this kind of a knowledge, if I were to be situated, and then if I perform some action basically here means performing work, doing devotional service, doing my karma, doing my day-to-day activities, that is eventually going to lead to bhakti. Second 6 chapters, Krishna speaks directly about bhakti. Chapter 12, yesterday we covered that. And then these last 6 chapters is going to explain how Gyan will lead to bhakti. Because you see, in the last chapter, Krishna says that I am the swift deliverer from the ocean of birth and death. Now, when he says I am the swift deliverer of the ocean of birth and death, he's basically saying that in this material universe where we are entangled with birth and death, repeated birth and death, we by ourselves do not have the power to break away from that cycle. Neither does anybody else. It's only Krishna. So therefore, he will declare the knowledge that is needed to elevate his devotees from the material world. Because right now we are all acting in this material world. So how do we elevate ourselves? So there is this knowledge that is going to be described by Krishna in this 13th chapter. So here's just an overview of the 13th chapter. We have the different topics that are going to be discussed. First is Kshetra and Kshetragya. Kshetra refers to the body or the field of knowledge, and Kshetragya refers to the one who knows that. Krishna will then talk about the process of knowledge. We'll examine that, and there's a chart about that you can study. He'll then talk about the object of knowledge. When you have this kind of a knowledge, who's the object? Who's that Gayam? That Gayam, the one to be known, is the soul and the super soul. And then he'll talk about Prakriti, Purusha, and their union, and then he'll just close out with the vision of knowledge. So Arjuna actually starts off and he says, I like to understand this kshetra, right? He says, he asked a number of questions actually. Prakriti, Purusha, the kshetragya. He talks about the field, the knower of the field, what is to be known. So he talks about all of that. And then we have to understand that Srila Prabhupada explains that when we talk about the kshetra basically means the area in which we have control over. So right now we have this body that is made of the senses. It is a field of activity, right? Not necessarily having control over, but basically being able to have a field of where we can do work. Like for example, if I have to eat, I can actually sit down and I can eat. I can use my hands and I can eat. That's actually some activity that I can engage in. But let us say if I would like to have any of you devotees eat, right? That's something that you would have to do yourself. So the field of activity for the conditioned soul. If I'm thinking, if I have to make a decision, I will be the one to make a decision. That's going on within my mind, right? If I were to ask you to make a decision, that would be for yourself. You can at most give me your opinion. You can give me a recommendation, but not a decision. That's something that I will need to make. So, Srila Prabhupada actually tells us that this kshetra is like the field. And he gives this example that, like just like you have these dancers within the dancing stage, all these dancers who are on the stage, they are limited to that stage, wherever they are. Even if you have some of the street dancers, they are limited to that street, that circle of on the street wherever they are dancing. So Prabhupada gives us this example to understand that when we talk about kshetra, it's actually referring to that field where one can actually do stuff. Okay. Similarly, like if we are actually studying something, we are doing some school work, then our school work is limited to that field of that particular subject that we are trying to address. So that is a kshetra. Okay. This might get asked, so just be prepared. Kshetragya is basically one who should not identify himself with the body, the knower of the field. So when you say the one who does not identify with the body, right now, if I just have this body, I know from what Srila Prabhupada has told us before that within this body there are two knowers. Krishna says that that he is within this body as well, expanded as Paramatma. So the Supreme Lord is a proprietor, he's a controller, he's a knower of all bodies. This is a very significant point we have to understand, dear devotees. Whereas the Jiva is the proprietor or the controller and the knower only of his body. What does this mean? This means that I am the Jiva, I am the soul. And let us say that if I have a headache, then I can feel that headache because it is in my body. It is within my field of activity. But you may not be able to feel the headache that I have because it is not within your field of activity, right? Similarly, if you are hungry, then I will not be able to figure out whether you're hungry or not. It's something that is a signal that your body will give you. So those are the individual bodies, and therefore the knower of these individual bodies is known as the soul. That's who we are. We are the soul. We are the jiva. But the knower of all bodies is the super soul. That super soul that resides within our heart, every single one of us. That super soul, the super soul in your body is the same as the super soul in my body. So that super soul is the knower of all bodies. That super soul knows what's going on. Simultaneously, the super soul knows, oh, this person is doing such and such person is doing such and such, third person is doing such and such, third person is, fourth person is thinking such and such. The super soul knows all of that. The super soul knows all of that. And the knowledge that Krishna is going to talk about, it means to understand the position of Prakriti, which is referring to the nature, the Purusha, which is the enjoyer, and Ishwar, which is the knower who controls both the nature and the individual soul. So Ishwar is the one who controls the nature as well as the individual soul. So knowledge is to understand Prakriti, Purusha, and Ishwar. So again, continuing on with the Kshetra and Kshetragya. We get this knowledge, right? We get this knowledge from where? Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. Now, according to the Upanishads, there are 5 stages of Brahman realization. Can you guys see this, or should I make it a little bigger? Let me see if I can make it larger. Okay. Oh, that's not going to work. Sorry. Yeah, that's not going to work. Because it's this, yeah. Anyways, this is fine. Okay, so there are 5 stages of Brahman realization. So the outermost stage is Annamaya. And then gradually, as you go inward, it goes to Pranamaya, Manomaya, Vijnanamaya, and finally Anandamaya. Now, what does each of these stages mean? Annamaya is the external most covering. That basically means that just like the word Anna means food, that I'm going to be depending on food for existence. That's the first level. Then comes Pranamaya, where I realize that the absolute truth is living symptoms or the life forms. That is Prana, where we have an understanding. Then comes Gyan, which is a realization through thinking, feeling, and willing. Because right now we are all willing to study the Bhagavad Gita and we are understanding. That realization that we're getting is through Jnanamaya. Vijnanamaya, there is a difference between Gyan and Vigyan. Gyan is knowledge, Vigyan is realized knowledge, practical knowledge. So, distinguishing the mind and the life symptoms from the living entity itself. So, the mind and the symptoms of consciousness is different from the consciousness itself. When one gets to that level, it's called Vijnanamaya. And finally, Anandamaya, which is the realization of the all blissful nature, which is Krishna's effulgence, which is that Brahman. So, if one dovetails himself with that Anandamaya, then he becomes perfect. Now, how do we dovetail ourselves with that? We basically engage in the services of Krishna. Do you understand what is the meaning of dovetail? Dovetail basically means it's a joint like that. There are 2 separate things, but when they come together, it blends perfectly. It blends perfectly, just like that. And it just seems like one unit, right? If you just take them out, but then it goes in like that. And you see on the left, there's actually a picture that shows what does that dovetail mean. You know, it's a common thing that is used for building furnitures and, you know, homes and construction and various construction things and so forth. So when we engage ourselves in the service of Krishna, we are dovetailing ourselves, the soul, in the service of Krishna. And at that point of time, this body becomes spiritualized. This body, which is a material body, becomes spiritualized. And that's a good spiritualization. That's a good use of our body. Continuing on, the field. So within this field, Krishna talks about that there are 24 elements that this body is made of. There are 5 great elements: the false ego, intelligence, mind, unmanifested. There are 10 working senses, then are 10 object senses. That the 10 senses of the mind, the 5 sense objects, the 10 senses, the working senses. So that all make total 24. Now, if we talk about the interaction of the field between the soul and this body, we see that as part of this interaction, there are various kind of emotions that actually come up. So that is where we'll see the manifestation of the subtle body. Now, this interaction that goes on between the field and the knower, it's kind of like a dense forest, because it's absolutely impossible for me to understand, oh, when is the soul acting? When is the mind acting? When is the senses acting? Am I using my intelligence properly? You know, it's just so much of mishmash back and forth going on that it becomes difficult for me to understand. Therefore, Krishna then gives us the process of knowledge. This is the chart I was referring to. So he says that, you know, that these items are the process of knowledge. Everything else you don't need to worry about. Humility, great, it's a great characteristic to have, to be humble. Pridelessness is to not have any pride. Non-violence, tolerance, simplicity, accepting a spiritual master. Those are all the processes. Cleanliness, steadiness, self-control, the renunciation of sense objects, absence of false ego, perception of evils of birth and death, detachment, no entanglement with family, even-mindedness, ananya bhakti. That's what will take us to. People talk about living in a solitary place, acceptance of importance of self-realization, philosophical search for the absolute truth. So Prabhupada actually says that as for the actual advancement in spiritual science, one should have a test to see how far he's progressing, and then you can judge. If you look through all these different symptoms of these processes of knowledge that Krishna is giving us and say, okay, how much of these have I cultivated in my character? That will give you that much indication of the advancement that one would make. Simple example, non-violence. Do we all practice non-violence? Yes, we do. How do we do that? We do not, well, one is just the physical non-violence, is obviously, we accept food stuff which is offered to Krishna. And obviously that does not involve any kind of violence to any living entity. But then also, while non-violence also means that I am not harming others, or I am not checking or stopping the spiritual advancement of other living entities. And I'm basically helping others to advance in their spiritual life. So non-violence means that also. Non-violence basically goes towards compassion. I'm compassionate for all the living entities, and therefore I do not want to hurt anybody. Humility. I am basically considering myself as humble. And then the, cleanliness, steadiness. These are all key processes of knowledge. Refer to this chart and dive deep into it. And then Krishna goes and talks about the Gayam, which is the soul and the super soul. So the soul is the Brahman or of the individual soul. That's what this is within our body. And this is referring to as the Vijnana Brahma as opposed to Ananda Brahma. The super soul is all pervading. Many hands, many legs, eyes, heads, everywhere. So in spite of all of that, sometimes he gets called as Nirguna. We discussed this yesterday, that when you talk about as Nirguna, Nirguna basically means that he has no material qualities, but he is full of spiritual qualities. And therefore, we see that although he is the original source of all the senses, he is beyond the power of material senses. Krishna is beyond any material senses because he's fully spiritual. Krishna is not material. Continuing on, we see that the Supreme Lord is the knowledge, and he's the object of knowledge, and he's the goal of knowledge. Everything altogether. We may think, oh, Krishna is so far away, situated in Goloka Vrindavan. Yeah, he's situated there, but he's also situated within our hearts. How? By means of expansion. Krishna expands himself. In our hearts, he's seated as Paramatma. He's seated as Paramatma. So, Krishna says that Mad Bhakta can understand. One who is my devotee, they'll be able to understand. Otherwise, people who they do not understand this verse properly, they will think that, oh, you know what, Krishna is there, but we say Krishna is here. Oh, it's just a contradiction. Krishna is just telling Bhagavad Gita, which is full of contradictions. He doesn't really know what he's talking about. But devotees have the proper understanding. Continuing on, he says, knowledge and development of knowledge mean understanding oneself in Krishna consciousness. In other words, knowledge is nothing but the preliminary stage of understanding devotional service perfectly. So we need to understand devotional service. Okay, let's continue on. So the living entity in this category, this is the Prakriti Purusha, and that union is being explained. And here we see that the living entity is basically his energy, and the super soul is his personal expansion. And all the transformations that are happening with respect to living entities are because of the body. As far as the spirit is concerned, the living entities are the same. Now, both material nature and living entity are eternal, but the body is actually not eternal. Obviously, the body perishes. So then we find that yet in this body, there's another transcendental enjoyer, which is Paramatma. And he's seated in everyone's body as the overseer, the permitter, the supreme proprietor. This is important. The role of the Paramatma in our hearts, or the function of Paramatma in our hearts, is to be the overseer. He oversees everything that we're doing. He does not interfere with our free will. He just oversees everything that's going on. But then he also permits. If I desire to do something, he's like, okay, fine, go do it. Because he's a supreme proprietor. He does not interfere with our supreme will. So when we understand this relationship between the soul and the super soul, that will make us eligible for liberation. This is the ways of realizing the soul. So Srila Prabhupada actually says here that in the modern society, there's no education about spiritual philosophy in life. Therefore, the recommended process for spiritualization is to hear from authorities. And then finally, Krishna is now going to conclude this chapter. He talks about the vision of knowledge. Okay. So when he talks about the vision of knowledge, he says that soul, does nothing. It only desires. Soul is not entangled. It's the material body, which is a machine, which is designed by the Supreme Lord to fulfill the desires. The sky, just like the sky is all pervading, it does not mix. It does not mix, with anything. The spirit and body, they do not mix with each other. The example is given of the sun. The sun is situated in one place, but it's illuminating the whole universe. Similarly, a small particle of the spirit soul, although situated in the heart of the body, is illuminating the whole body by consciousness. This is an important point to understand. The soul is situated near the heart of the body. Tiny, tiny part, the soul. But the soul is powerful enough to get the consciousness out in all the body. And therefore, when I prick myself with a pin, I feel pain because consciousness is present. If the soul were to be removed from the body, then we call it a dead body. And if you pierce the dead body with a pin, will it feel any pain? No, because the consciousness does not exist in that dead body. Similarly, just as sun is situated in one place, but it gives out light all over, similarly, the soul is situated in our heart and it gives out consciousness all over the body. And then we get to understanding that there are different types of bodies. When we see many, many individuals, we should stop seeing them as the bodies. The Kshetragya, which is both the soul and the super soul, have nothing to do with matter. And in this way, we see that there are different bodies that exist, right? And they're all individual souls, and these individual souls have the same in their bodies, the same super soul, which is there in all of us. So again, just to summarize this 13th chapter, Krishna says the process of knowledge is to accept a spiritual master and hear submissively from him. So we are accepting Srila Prabhupada and we are receiving his instructions and are hearing submissively. Object of knowledge is that one can understand that this whole material manifestation is just a combination of the soul and the material element under the supervision of the Supreme Lord. And one can thus be transferred to the spiritual world. That's the goal of knowledge. So start by submission to a spiritual master, hear from him, learn from him, and then understand that this material world is just a combination of the soul and material elements. And when you do that, you act in such a way where you serve Krishna, you do devotional service, and then you can be transferred to the spiritual world. And that actually concludes chapter number 13. Are there any questions or comments anybody would like to make for about just a couple of minutes before we go to chapter 14? Did everybody understand this chapter? It's a little technical, it's not as juicy as the devotional service that we talked about yesterday. It's not as juicy as the universal form. It's a little technical. We talk about Kshetra with the body, the Kshetra gear, which is the soul, the super soul, how they interact, what is the process of knowledge, what is the goal of knowledge. So in that sense, it's a little, philosophical, technical kind of a topic. So did all that make sense to you? Yes, Navneet, you have your hand raised.
I just wanted to ask if the soul is in the heart, like where's the super soul?
Sorry, ask that one more time.
So when the soul is in our heart, like where's the super soul then?
In the heart as well. Super soul and the soul are both in the heart. They're both situated right here. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Prabhuji.
Advait M is asking, what is the main point of chapter 13? Good question. Advait, the main point of chapter 13 is to understand this material nature. That's how that basically is to have this. Basically, from chapter 13 onwards is the explanation of the material nature. Because a devotee, one who says, okay, you know what, I get like chapter 12, chapter 11 concludes by saying, okay, here's the universal form, and Krishna says you should do devotional service. Okay, fine, I get that. But I'm still in this material world. How do I navigate myself in this material world? So if we have that understanding of the material world, then it becomes easier for me to navigate. So Krishna explains this material universe, and he explains his body, the soul, and all of that interaction, the process of what we should go through. And therefore, that will help us to elevate ourselves by actually having that knowledge. Up until now, that knowledge was not given. We know it because Srila Prabhupada has been emphasizing this point over and over again. So that is the main point of chapter 13. Okay? Get it? All right, let's now go to chapter 14. Okay. All right, chapter 14 is titled The Three Modes of Material Nature. Now, what do you mean, three modes of material nature? So, Krishna actually starts off by talking. Yeah, Navneet, you had a question? Or you just had raised your hand?
No, I just wanted to say the three modes.
Okay. So, the three modes of material nature, Navneet will know. Navneet knows that, and he will share that with us. Go ahead, Navneet.
Goodness, passion, and ignorance.
Very good. The goodness, passion, and ignorance. Those are the three modes of material nature. Now, in this chapter, we are going to understand how these three modes interact with each other, how everything can show a symptom, like what are some things that in mode of goodness, what are some things that are in mode of passion, what are some things that are in mode of ignorance, and so forth. Krishna starts, and then Krishna will conclude this chapter by saying, how do we transcend these modes of material nature? Which is another thing. When he time and time again he refers to devotional service. It is such an important thing. So Krishna starts off by saying that, okay, Arjun, again, I am going to share this knowledge with you, right? The best of all knowledge. And once you have received this knowledge, then the sages have attained perfection. Do we want to attain perfection? Yes, we want to attain perfection. So then Krishna describes in this chapter the modes, how they interact, how they bind us, and eventually how do we get liberation from them, and how is the living entity placed within his modes because the Lord puts him there by his plans. That's another question to ask. Why is it the living entity stuck in the material world? Because at some point when we were in the spiritual world, we had a desire to be in the material world to see how it is to enjoy. So Krishna said, okay. So he glanced at the material world, and through his glance came all the souls injected into this material universe. Okay, Now here, Krishna says that I'm the seed-giving father, okay, in this material universe. He's a seed-giving father. So, so Prabhupada is giving us an explanation of the world, that everything here is taking place due to the combination of Kshetra and Kshetragya, the body and the spirit soul. And this combination of material nature and the living entity is made possible by Supreme God himself. This Mahat Tattva is the total cause of total cosmic manifestation, and that total substance is the material cause. So this is again getting a little technical here. But what Krishna is saying, that the explanation of how this material world came about. So this material world came about by an interaction of Purusha and Prakriti. Prakriti is the material nature which is there in the unmanifest state. Purusha is Supreme Lord himself. When he glances at the Prakriti starts getting agitated, and then it transforms into Mahat Tattva. And then there's further agitation of Mahat Tattva is where then this manifestation actually that takes place. And that manifestation is then called Prakriti. So Prakriti has two meanings, right? That's what the understanding is. So Supreme Personality of Godhead, he impregnates this total substance. He actually puts these souls within them. He glances at them and he puts a spirit within them. When the spirit goes in, that is when the matter starts getting agitated, and then the universes become possible. By themselves, the universes will not be possible. People talk about Big Bang Theory, intelligence, quantum mechanics, all that good stuff. All that requires some level of spiritual intersection. By itself, matter will not be able to do anything. That's an important point to understand. Krishna says, Sarva Yonishu Kaunteya Murti Asambhavati Yaha Tasham Brahma Mahad Yonir Aham Bija Pradapita. He continues saying, he says, I am the Bija Pradapita. I am the seed-giving father. Sarva Yonishu Kaunteya. Kaunteya is referring to Arjun. Sarva Yoneshu. He says, all the Yoni. Yoni means the different bodies. Excuse me, the different bodies. There are different species, I should say. There are 8.4 million species. So all those species, 8.4 million, Murtaya Sambhavanti Yaha, those forms, Sambhavanti, they appear. How do those 8.4 million species appear? Tasham Brahma Mahad Yoner. He said that this Mahat Yoni, the source of birth in the material substance, right? That source, that supreme source of all of the supreme source for what? For all those forms of living entities, those living species in the 8.4 million in this material universe. Who is that source? That Mahat Yoni, Aham Bija Pradapita. Aham, I am the Pita, I am the father. Bija Pradaha, I am the one who gives that seed. I'm the one who gives that seed. So this is important to understand. This is a text number 14. Sorry, 4, chapter 14. So here is a way to understand that we have the spiritual world where we are lovingly at Krishna's service at the center of our consciousness. Then at some point we have a desire to come to the spiritual world, and in the spiritual desire to come in the material world, and then we develop this, come to the material world, we develop this false ego, and that's the junction between our spiritual identity and our material existence, this development of the false ego. False ego basically means that I am the master. I'm identifying myself with the body. I am not the servant of anybody. Whereas my real ego, true ego, is that I am the servant of Krishna. And so when I develop that false ego, that is when the body, which is controlled by the combinations of the modes, gets manifested. Now I get into a body. Okay. Now comes the 3 modes of material nature. So this is another chart which is important to understand. So as Navneet said, there are 3 modes: goodness, passion, and ignorance. First, we're going to talk about goodness. in goodness that we have people who, for example, these are philosophers, scientists, poets, they may repeatedly get entangled in their birth and death cycle. But because of the illusion of one energy, one thinks that, that life is pleasant. The binding force is the attachment to the sense of happiness, satisfaction, knowledge, and superiority. That's a mode of goodness. So characteristics and manifestations that they are illuminated in the gates of this body, and they are free from one sinful reaction. And the results of whatever the actions are, they are pure, they actually get into real knowledge, and they get elevation to the higher planets. And when they die, they attain the pure higher planets of the great sages. Those are the people in the mode of goodness. Then we have people in the mode of passion. People in the mode of passion are very passionate. They are very somebody, Navneet, you asked the question. I thought when people have ego, it means they say they are God. No. Is that your question, Navneet? No, that is not correct. That when people have ego, so ego is also referred to as attitude or pride. When somebody says, oh, somebody has an ego, they have an attitude. Okay, that they are very proud, and it's not necessarily used in the good sense. Ego basically is saying that, oh, this person is, this person is inflated himself so much that he thinks that he is bigger or superior than all of us. So that is ego. They are not God. They are not God. And that is the inflation of the ego is basically the false ego. That pride that people have. Oh, I am the commander of the army. I am the president of the country. When they actually develop that sense that, okay, I am actually acting something like I am not, then that is the ego. Now, if you're the president of the country and you're serving the country, but you're in the humble mood saying, oh, I'm just, a small, tiny soul, and I've been given the role to execute my responsibilities as a president, that's not ego. But when people, they develop this ego and then they start taking advantage of other people, that's not correct. Okay? Thank you. So people in the mode of passion, these people, oh, is there another chat? Oh, thank you. Okay. So in the mode of passion, there is this thing that people actually want and honor in the society. They want to have a happy family, nice children, and everything else. And these are all products of passion. So as long as one is hankering after these things, he has to work very hard. Therefore, it is clearly stated here that he becomes associated with the fruits of his activities, and thus he becomes bound by such activities. So the binding force here is the attachment to that fruit of activities. And this person who's in the mode of passion, they're very intense. They have unlimited desires and longings. There's no end to sense gratification. They generally just come back to the earthly planets. They do not attain higher planets. And the results of action is generally misery and greed. Is that what it leads to? And again, that is very painful. And finally, in mode of ignorance, what happens is that people, they always appear to be dejected, and they are addicted to intoxicants and sleeping. And here, whatever one does is good, neither for him nor anyone, Krishna says, in this mode. It's not good for you, not good for anybody else. The binding force is madness or bewilderment, laziness. People in this mode, you'll find they're generally deluded. They are lazy. They are in darkness. And for these people, when they die, they actually go to lower planets. They don't stay at the earthly planet. They go to the lower planet. And whatever work they do, the result of that is foolishness, madness, illusion, and people actually even end up in hellish planets. So the question then is, does one mode become prominent within a person? If so, how? And Prabhupada explains, according to our karma, our work, our association, our choice of food, and so on, a particular mode becomes predominant within us. So, for example, if I'm associating with devotees, if I'm honoring prasadam, if I'm chanting Krishna, if I'm reading Prabhupada books, all of those things are in the mode of goodness. If I'm leading a good life, if I'm staying truthful to myself, that's the mode of goodness. If somebody who associates with people, who go to the bar and they drink, that is obviously not a good one. That's in the mode of ignorance. Choice of food, when people, generally go out, eat all kinds of stuff without any regulations, again, that defines what mode they are in. So the question then is that these modes of material nature, they actually are always existing within us, and they always fight for supremacy among themselves. Goodness, passion, and ignorance will among themselves fight for supremacy. And we find that, at times when we are, excuse me, when sometimes we might find that if a person is actually associating with something or taking up some kind of bad habit, then their mode will actually change. But the point is, for the people who are in ignorance, to rise above, stop doing those activities and rise above to the mode of passion. For those who are in the mode of passion, they should rise above to the mode of goodness. One needs to be situated in the mode of goodness to be then eventually be situated in the mode of pure goodness. Right? So the question is, how do I transcend these modes? Because as long as I'm in the material world, I will still be subject to these material modes. How do I transcend? Krishna says that unless one has the help of a spiritual authority, we cannot understand in what position we are actually situated. So the first thing to understand, which position we are actually situated. And that is given by a number of things. Prabhupada, so many other saints within our ISKCON, they will help us. And we should know the Supreme Lord. When we know that, then we can transcend these modes and we can enjoy the real nectar in this life. Again, this is a chart that talks about the symptoms in which one is known to transcend these three modes. And these symptoms are that someone can perceive within himself. That's on the left hand side. Somebody can, and the symptoms that are perceived by others is on the right hand side. So what one can himself perceive is, oh, there's no hankering for anything, there's no envy, engaging in devotional service, right? And we don't necessarily desire to enjoy the body. One is conscious of the material body and he acts only for sense gratification. But when one transfers the consciousness to Krishna, the sense gratification automatically stops. So that's all when he perceives, and he's transcendental. Others, when they look at this person, they see, oh, he's not affected by honor or dishonor. He accepts things that are favorable for his duty in Krishna consciousness. He takes everybody as a dear friend. He doesn't hate anybody. And he's equally disposed. Social and political issues, they do not necessarily affect him because he knows the situation of temporary upheavals and disturbances. And he doesn't attempt anything for his sake. He attempts anything for Krishna. He's serving Krishna, not anything for his sake. Krishna then says, he who does not hate illumination, attachment, and delusion when they are present for long, or for them when they disappear, such a person is said to have transcended the modes of material nature. Do we all want to transcend? Yes, we want to transcend. How is it that we will be able to transcend? By performing devotional service to Krishna. And then Krishna speaks this wonderful verse Mamacha avyabhicharena bhakti yogena sevate sagunan samatityetan brahma bhuyaya kalpate. He speaks this absolutely wonderful verse, so poetic, so juicy. You know, this verse is so juicy that we actually get to learn a lot from this verse. So let's read this verse and spend some time on it. So mamacha avyabhicharena. So mamacha, ma means on me, unto me, upon me. Upon me, what? One person, a person who avyabhicharena, which means without fail, without deviation, without a doubt, without any kind of transgression, without any kind of digression. Avyabhicharena. Absolutely. All you have to do is just serve Krishna. I'm sorry, that comes in the next line. So without fail, what do they do without fail? They have to do something, right? Bhakti yogena sevate. Sevate means to serve, to render some service. And how do you render service? Bhakti yogena. Did Krishna say here karma yogena? Did Krishna say here jnana yogena? Did Krishna here say just like any kind of yoga? He is very, very particular. He says bhakti yogena sevate. So when you do that, what happens? Sagunan samatityetan. That these gunas, these modes of material nature, you will be able to transcend them. Samatitya. You'll be able to transcend them. And not only you'll be able to transcend them, so it's not like you go above this, but then what happens is you come to that platform of what is that platform? Brahma Bhuyaya Kalpate. Brahma Bhuyaya Kalpate. You'll be able to come to the platform of Brahman. Krishna says, one should not be disturbed by the activities of the modes of material nature. So we get, in that sense, when we look at the material nature, we may get attracted by things that are, precious, and then we may get repulsed by things that are not so precious. But if we don't get disturbed by all that, and instead of putting the consciousness into such activities, we need to transfer our consciousness to Krishna's activities. And these activities, when we transfer to Krishna, this is known as Bhakti Yoga. Always acting for Krishna. And when we talk about Krishna, by the way, we are talking about all his expansions. We're talking about Lord Nrsimhadev, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Lord Ramachandra, Vaman Dev, they're all Krishna. They're all expansions of Krishna. And so when we are in Krishna consciousness, in devotional service, it means that we are, in quality only, we are kind of getting the nature of Krishna, Sat, Chit, and Ananda, only in quality, not in quantity. So Bhakti Yoga means, very clearly stated, Bhakti Yoga means the Lord is there, the devotee is there, and the activity of exchange of love between the Lord and the devotee is there. That is what Bhakti Yoga is. If one is not situated on the same transcendental position with the Lord, one cannot serve the Lord. See, this is an important position to understand. Krishna says, Brahma Bhuyaya Kalpate. You'll be at the level of Brahman. Now, why is it important to be at the level of Brahman? Because you need to be at that level where you can actually serve Krishna. And Prabhupada gives an example that if I want to go serve, let's say, the king, or if I want to go serve, let's just say the king, then I need to actually be situated in the palace. I cannot serve the king physically if I'm outside of the palace, right? I need to be in the palace. So therefore, that means that, okay, now I'm qualitatively one. You qualitatively become one with Brahman. By attainment of that Brahman, we do not necessarily lose our Brahman identity as an individual soul. That remains. Just as if I were to go into the palace to serve the king, it does not mean that I become the king. I am still I. I'm still the servant of the king. It's just that I'm going to the palace to serve the king. And then just to make things clear, when Krishna says Brahma Bhuyaya Kalpate, He says that I am the basis of this impersonal Brahman. Because one might ask, like, oh, after reading text in the previous verse, he says, oh, why one in full devotional service will attain Brahman? After all, his desire is not to attain Brahman, but to have Krishna's service. Right? But Krishna says, I am the basis of that Brahman. So you look at these three circles on the left side, that the larger circle is basically the full understanding of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. A little less than that is Paramatma, and the least of that is Brahman realization. So the Supreme Lord, he's full in six opulences. And when a devotee approaches him, there is an exchange of these six opulences. Srila Prabhupada writes in this purport. Just like the servant of the king enjoys on an almost equal level with the king. Therefore, the realization of the Brahman or eternity is included in devotional service. It's already possessed by a person who's engaged in devotional service. And then, ultimate conclusion of this chapter, devotional service. The way to transcend modes of nature is devotional service. Srila Prabhupada says, devotional service to the Lord is very simple. One should always engage in the service of the Lord. Eat the remnants of the foodstuffs offered to the deity. Smell the flowers offered to his lotus feet. See the places of the Lord and his transcendental pastimes. Read the different activities of the Lord, his reciprocation of love with his devotees. Chant always the transcendental vibration of Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. And observe the fasting days of appearances and disappearances of the Lord and his devotees. That's what devotional service is. It's so simple. Very simple. Anybody can do it. So that was the discussion of the modes of material nature and how to transcend the modes of material nature. So that concludes chapter number 14, the overview of chapter number 14. And with that, I will open up for any questions or discussion if anybody wants to have. Advaita Chandra, you have your hand raised. Oh, wait. I'm not seeing. Hold on. Advaita Chandra, yes, you have your hand raised. Go ahead, unmute yourself. I can't hear you, Advaita Chandra. I can't hear you.
How about now?
In and out.
Hare Krishna?
Hare Krishna, now I can hear you.
Yeah, sure. All right.
Okay, you're out again, can't hear you. You want to just type your question in the chat?
Hare Krishna?
Hare Krishna, I can hear you now.
Yes. So yeah, now the audio, it said there was some unknown error. So
Okay.
anyways, my question was related on the basis that of the line Brahma Bhuyaya Kalpate in 1426.
Yes.
How essentially it says we attain the state of Brahman. And the example we Gaudiya Vaishnavas understand that it's qualitatively, like when we fully realize that we're qualitatively the same as the Lord, then we can serve him better than that, we get it. But when Mayavadis look at the statement, they see that Bhakti Yoga leads to Mayavad, leads to us becoming Brahman. And your acharyas, yes, they may say qualitative. So how do we prove that, logically Krishna is saying Krishna can indicate like that it is qualitative? Because in the verse it's just saying Brahma Bhuyaya Kalpate.
Yep,
So
good point. Now, if the thing is that for those Mayavad philosophers, we should just ask them, I said, don't just take a verse out of context. Read the whole thing, read the whole chapter. Now, it has the chapter completed by verse 26? No, chapter completes by verse 27. So while you're focusing on one text, you're missing out completely the next verse. When you go to the next verse, Krishna says, I am the basis of Brahmano hi pratishtaham. He said, yes, you can, go to Brahman. And Krishna says, he is the basis of Brahman. Brahman comes from Krishna. So therefore, who's the highest? Is it Brahman or is it Krishna? So devotional service, yes, will lead you to Brahman. And from Brahman, once you achieve that, you're at that same level as Krishna. So that is the complete understanding. It's just like saying, typically when you take things out of context, let's just say if somebody is trying to understand the nature of ocean, what does the ocean water taste like? And if somebody, goes from a chemistry lab and takes some, some sugar water or something, and just pours it at the beach, okay? And somebody takes that sample and then does some testing in the lab and say, oh, this is sugar water. What will be their conclusion? That the whole ocean is sugar water. But what they have failed to do is that they have failed to take additional samples and draw some kind of a conclusion. And they have not seen the whole thing. So that would be, this is like not even getting into Gaudiya Vaishnava, thing. I'm just saying logically. If I were to say, Advaita, let's go out for dinner tonight. We'll have dinner in some prasadam in the temple tonight. And then you go there and I don't go there. I don't show up. Now you're like, Prabhuji, you asked me, I was there. I was waiting for you. It's like 8:30 and you still haven't shown up. Then I would say, hey, you know what? Right after that, I said, oh, never mind. I can't make it. I got a headache. And if you just focus on the first part of my instruction, you don't focus on the second part, obviously people are not going to be able to construe the correct message. So that would be my thing. Logically, let's look at the whole verse, the whole text, and derive at a logical conclusion. That's what I would do. Okay?
Yes.
Navneet, you have your hand raised. Navneet?
Yes, Prabhuji. So when you said Brahman is the same level as Krishna, I thought like nobody.
Wait, I can't hear you, Navneet. Your voice is breaking up.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So when you said that the Brahman is the same level as Krishna, I thought that nobody was the same level as Krishna.
So yeah, nobody's at the same level of Krishna, but Brahman is actually an energy of Krishna. It is the energy of Krishna. Just like, just like you live in your home, and if somebody were to come and associate with you, they would have to come to your home and associate with you. And then if they are in your home, it doesn't mean the home is theirs. The home is still yours, right? The home does not belong to them. They've just been there for some time so that they can associate with you. Similarly, that Brahman is the level of Krishna, meaning it's actually an energy of Krishna. And once we get to Brahman, then actually from there we can see, oh, the Brahman is the energy of Krishna, and we just continue serving Krishna. Okay? Any other questions or discussions? All right. Thank you all very much, dear devotees. We will conclude for today. Mancha kalpatarubhishcha kripa sindhubhyo patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Gaur Premanande. Hari Hari Bo.
Hare Krishna.
Prabhuji, thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Prabhuji.